I was a designer. Then I listened to Michael Smythe. And Michael said to me, you must always challenge the brief. So I spent a lot of time challenging briefs and crossed to the dark side. So I went to business school. Yes, I'm concerned about this presentation. The reason I'm concerned is that there's been a lot of talk about values. And I'm afraid I'm going to be talking about numbers. So I'm at risk, I guess, of being bombarded with soft fruit, but please hold back because it's a health and safety issue, as you've already seen. So please hold back. So I'll be talking about numbers. It's terribly boring. All those who are going to be bored by this, leave now. I'm disappointed. I do understand the issues around talking numbers. To find numbers, we actually have to start thinking about what we want to measure and how we're going to measure it. And so, in this respect, there was I've pinched some slides from the Wellington Regional Council, by the way. So that WRS stands for the Wellington Regional Strategy Group. And these slides have been nicked from them. That's okay. They know about it, so you don't have to, you don't have to dog me in or anything. So, yeah, numbers. And we were introduced to the Wellington Regional Council by Adrian. Adrian's in the audience somewhere, and thank you, Adrian, for doing so. Because we represent a UK company called K-Matrix. And K-Matrix are involved in the development of data that is used for market intelligence. And they were the organisation that provided the taxonomy and the data for the British Council. Now, the Wellington Regional Council was concerned about how they allocated their resources. And having allocated resources, or how resources were allocated generally, and having allocated resources, how did you monitor the impact of that? Now, I'm talking purely about the numbers, right? The values, all the things that these wonderful people were talking about in terms of impact. I'm narrowing it down to numbers, right? The economic numbers. So, Wellington Regional Council were concerned about how they did this stuff. And we came along and said, have you ever heard of the British Council? And they said, yes, we have. We've got some data from them, and we'd love to have the same sort of data. And we said, funny that, because K-Matrix produced that data. And so there was a relationship established quite quickly. I've illustrated some of the problems this is their slide, that they talked about. They were unable to monitor sectors. They were concerned because only data that they could capture was that was presented by ANZIC codes. And ANZIC codes were never intended to look at how you evaluate the economic performance of any sector, because they're just not granular enough.
Excuse me, can you just tell me what ANZIC stands for?
Yes, I can do that. Oh, I want to know, okay. Australia and New Zealand Standard Industry Codes. And it's a framework that Statistics New Zealand use to capture data so that they can report to government about how things are changing. But they are not fit for purpose in terms of actually evaluating the interventions and the impact of those interventions. And these are the kinds of things that the Wellington Regional Council were trying to do. Interestingly, simultaneously, we have been doing some work with Callaghan Innovation. And using K-Matrix again, we actually discovered, we helped them with a particular asset that they have, and showed them that asset was probably worth 10 times more than what they thought it was. Why? Because we could provide them with some data that was far more granular than they previously had. And it changed their entire view of the value of that asset. So that's the strategic stuff. Okay, so directing of R&D funding, research and development, design as part of development. Now I'll talk a little bit more about commercialization and some of the issues around how we get innovation and grow that innovation into something that's scaled. At the firm level, thinking about the Wellington region again, there was concerns about how these companies access capital for growth. You see, without good data about their sector or their subsector and the markets they operate in, it is very difficult to get investment. And so part of the issue for the WRS was, how can we show these companies the potential impact of their work, and economic impact of their work, if we don't have satisfactory data. And of course, it means poor market intelligence for these companies. And if you're making, when I talk about investment, I'm not only talking about investment coming into a company, but how much investment the owners of those firms are going to put into their firms without appropriate knowledge. So, this was the approach that the Wellington Regional Council suggested, and they also decided to engage with Callaghan, who were doing a very similar exercise with us, but at a firm level. They wanted to map a taxonomy, their own taxonomy, against the firms that they either were working with or they wanted to work with. So, there's some issues there that you'll all recognise. Some issues around the kinds of things that people have to make decisions about with inadequate, in many cases, inadequate data. The nice bit, and the really encouraging part, was when we brought the WRS and Callaghan together, they could see an opportunity to share information and to the advantage of both parties. And that was very encouraging. So where are we at for this project? Well, we started. We used in terms of CDI, for Creative and Digital Industries, we used the British Council taxonomy as a starting point. We then attempted to test that with a number of what we would consider to be subject matter experts. And we didn't get all that far, but anyway, we decided that what we'd do is go ahead and populate a taxonomy with data so that people could see the possibilities of what we were producing. And we're at that level now where we're actually showing what we have done so people can see what we've done, and they're saying to us, no, that's not going to work for us. So we can say, good, now we're getting somewhere. Now we can actually adjust this taxonomy so that it does reflect what you want, and then we can populate that with the appropriate metrics, and you'll have some data that you can use. So the typical things that we have done is for CDI, Creative and Digital Industries, we've broken that down to creative arts and digital media industries. And then based on the US taxonomy, we have metrics for 7 countries, broken down into market, available market, exports, number of companies involved, and employment heads. We've actually got a lot of other metrics as well, but these are the ones that the WRS wanted to focus on. We have had input from Massey and also a little bit from Victoria, but we've got a long way to go yet to get that taxonomy right. What do we mean by taxonomy? I know you can't read that, don't even try. What we mean by taxonomy is to actually give some labels to activities. So it's quite structured. We start with, at the highest level, this particular exercise, this particular example I should say, creative arts. Then we've taken that and broken it down at the next level to design. And then we've broken that level down to another level called component design for industry, and that's consumer goods, electronics, furniture, and so on. So you can see it is a breakdown of a particular discipline, activity, into its component parts. So think of it in terms of a supply chain from the bottom up and a value chain from the top down. And that's how these things are put together. Once you've got that in a form that is acceptable, to the subject matter experts and the people who are going to use it. Then you can populate that with appropriate measures. Once we have the taxonomy, we can do other things with it. Obviously, we can look at New Zealand as a whole, we can look at regions, we can look at other countries, we can split those into regions, a whole lot of things we can do from the data that's available to us. And these are all using the same taxonomy and the metrics that are chosen. And what do we mean by measure? Well, metrics is a measure. I've been using that word metrics. Fundamentally, we want to measure against the breakdown. We want to measure what is the economic activity, what are the transactions that take place. So, sorry guys, I'm very narrowly focused here. It's purely on numbers and the economy. But the reason I think I was invited here, I'm not quite sure why, but I think the reason that I was invited here is because there's going to be a strategy developed for design. And I know that the way to get attention for that is to put a number on it. If you can put a number on something, then you might get attention. By talking about other kinds of values, and boy, I can talk about that, I can assure you, talking about other kinds of values does not get the same kind of attention from, you know who, as the numbers will. So that's why I think I'm here. But, yeah. But ask Simon. Okay, so there's some issues around how we manage and manipulate this kind of data, so we can see a little bit further into the data and get some idea about what is going on. Now, what opportunities, if we have the taxonomy right, and we get that populated with the appropriate metrics, what opportunities does that provide? And we're suggesting to you that it can do things from an economic point of view by saying, what are our strengths? I heard this morning that we should really focus on our strengths. What are they? Do we really know? We can guess, but do we really know? And then, obviously one of the major things has been this collaboration between the Council and Callaghan. And that, between the two of them, we are looking at investment channels. This is investment from both locally, but more importantly from abroad. So Callaghan are taking a strategic approach as well, and we've got obviously there's other people around the place who are showing a little bit of interest. At the firm level, it's about R&D funding, including design, and that's all about investment. And it's about providing the kind of information that will attract investment. Because right now, for many companies, especially those companies who have innovated and now want to grow in scale, unless they have this kind of information that they can show, what is the market abroad, what is the available market abroad, and so on, they're going to struggle to find investment. And if they do get investment, it's going to be very expensive. So, why is this relevant to design? Talked about the current project. The next steps are to refine the taxonomy. We're working with Massey, and we're working with Victoria and a number of other subject matter experts to refine the taxonomy so it is useful. And then we'll refine the data alongside that taxonomy for its relevance, and obviously it needs to be relevant and usable. And I believe that once you've got that kind of information, and I know it's not the whole story, far from it, but it's a bit of it, and it's an important bit of it. Once you've got that information, then the strategy has a baseline. Because what we're talking about here is establishing a baseline so that you can then measure any changes through innovation or interventions. That's my story. I think that's why I came.